Okay, good morning. So today is a very interesting one. We've been discussing the halachas in Reish Ayin Gimel of Kiddush b'makom Sueda. That means for it to be a valid Kiddush, it has to be accompanied by a Suda. The question is, what constitutes a Suda? And that's the big question. So that is what we're going to discuss now. So says the Mechaber in Sifhei, Reish Ayin Gimel Sifhei, Kasu ha-ga'onim, had ein Kiddush b'makom Suda. This rule of Kiddush has to be b'makom Suda. Afidu achol dava muat. It doesn't have to be your standard meal of washing and having lechem mishnah, and this is your Friday night meal or your Shabbos lunch. Although we'll see that the Gaon was very makbid, and others that's the lechatchila, of course. Even say the Gaon, if you eat dava muat, hashasa kais yain, or you drink a cup of wine, shechayv alav bracha, yotzu yidei kiddush b'makom suda. That is constitutes makom suda. For goimer sudas makom acher, and you can finish off your suda somewhere else. So, for example, you have a roglach, let's say, we'll see soon in the Mishnah, and then that's considered kiddush makom suda. And then you're going to have lunch later on. That works. For dafka achol lechem eshasa yain, aval achol peiros lei. But if you just have some fruit, that it does not count as a suda. Says the Ramah. Well, if which would explain what that means. But if there's a bris on Shabbos, the male could drink from the wine, and that could count as kiddush b'makom suda. However, the minhag is to give it to the tinoik, and then the male will go home later and will have kiddush b'makom suda properly. Okay, we'll see the detail in a second. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Kotzen Chaf Aleph. So the Mechaber had said, Ein Kiddush b'makom suda is even if you eat a dova muat. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu al kol ponim shir kazayis. So it's not a tiny amount, it's got to at least be a kazayis. A kazayis is not a huge amount. Shechayv alav bracha travayakoi. The high shechayv alav bracha travayakoi, which means you only make an alamichya if you have a kazayis. Now how much is a kazayis? It's approximately 3/4 of a rogalach. So it's not a lot. So if you have one rogalach at a kiddush, then your yoytze, your kiddush makom suda. Doesn't have to be a lot. So it needs to be you need to have enough that you make a bracha achrona, which for eating purposes is a kazayis, or if you drink kais yain shechayav alav bracha. So says the Mishnah Berurah, hainu kashir revius. That means you drink a revius shechayav alav bracha achrona, which is the amount to require a bracha achrona, and al hagefen. The sasam mechaber kan kadas aposkim to the bracha achrona tzorich shir revius dafka. So the Mechaber is passing here that, according to those who say that for a revius you need a bracha achrona, dafka revius. That's the Rabbi Kivega's point. Prima godim betzadei dafidu im neimar ba'alma to the bracha achrona ein tzarich revius le'inyan sheyia nikra b'makom suda le'choshev b'pachas revius yain. For it, so to what constitutes as a suda for makom suda, either a kazayis of mezainas so far, or minimally, or a revius of wine. Even the Prima Godim would agree with that. Okay. V'goyme sudas ayin le'el b'simen kufayin ches. This is Sif Kot Chaf Gimel. Ayin le'el b'simen kufayin ches Sif Beis ba'Gad. L'chatchila le'yakum m'koyme b'li b'rukas hamazon. Really, you should just make kiddush, have your suda, and not go anywhere and bench there. Ach b'diavad k'she'oka in tzorich levarich b'rukas hamazon m'koydim. Ela ach gama so that if you need to go somewhere, then you can, and then you come back and you finish off your meal and make b'rukas hamazon. B'makom acher v'sham ein tzorich levarich oid. So when if I hear kiddush in shul and I have a rogalach or I have enough to count as a suda, then I'm okay. Or if you don't want to have mazonas, you have shasa yain. For koshkenim ochel mini targim mechamishes mini diyatza. And certainly, if you have one of the 5 means minimum of grain, then you are yoitza. The having a mezonas is actually more suda-like than having a revius of wine. Avol shecha or sham mashke, but having other drinks, that doesn't amount. That's not the same as having a revius of wine, and that will not constitute a suda. Afidu hayu chamar medina, even if it was like a chamar medina, it was a beer or things like that. That does not count as kiddush b'makom suda. It doesn't count as a suda. Ein yotze b'makom suda. Why? Wine is different in as much as it satiates. They argue and they say that many Rishonim hold that having a case of wine does not amount to Suda. So really one should try and avoid being soimech on having a case of wine for your Kiddush Makom Suda. And then he says, and dafka peres loy. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chavav, the Chamesh Minim Nikra Mazen. Mazonis, the Chamesh Minim is called Mazen, but not fruit. And Yain is considered part of a Suda because Soyed Halev, it satiates. Avol Shad Dvarim Afilu Ochel Mehem Harbe, Ein Choshev Suda Klal. Valkein. Mashenogim Nelech Lebeis Chosen. If you go to a Kiddush, or to whatever it may be, there's no pasababa kisnin there. There's no mazonas. There's some crisps and some peanuts and other nice things. Then you shouldn't be eating. It doesn't really help you that the person making Kiddush drank a revius. That helps for him himself. He can't have my Kiddush Makom Suda for me. We'll come back to that in a second. V'hinei the b'shiltei ha'gibarim kosov the after peiros die. Even for fruit, it's sufficient to kol Suda Shabbat nechsheves keva because anything you eat on Shabbos is called a kvias. Achdas hatuva shulchan aruch ikka that not to have peiros, not to rely on that for your Suda. Ach im cholash liboy k'tzas if a person is feeling weak ve'enoi atam mechameshes aminim lisoid acha hakos and he hasn't got mazonas to hand. Da says achrenim diyesh lismech al shilta giberim b'shachris. You can be soimech on the shilta giberim on Shabbos morning where Kiddush is drabonon that you can have some peiros. Avol b'layla b'vadai ein lismech olav v'shal peskim lisfir lukafaseo. But on Friday night you shouldn't be soimech on that. Let's just finish the Mishnah Berurah, then there are a few very interesting horrors. Kashio. Mishnah Berurah Chav Zayin. Dahainu sheyish tashir reviz. You should drink a reviz of wine. V'yesh oimrim she'enu yotzei yedei Kiddush b'makom Suda. Afilu yish tashir reviz. And some say that even just drinking a reviz of wine is not going to help you. Rak sorech lishas reviz yain milvad hakois shel Kiddush. That you actually need to drink another reviz of wine because that counts as your Suda in addition or separate to the wine that you drank for Kiddush. Okay, let's see some footnotes. So, first of all, the interesting ones I've picked out, number 30, the second paragraph, he says, so one issue, so we're knowing to have mazonis at Kiddush, and that would count as Kiddush Makom Suda. Now, a big question is, let's say you sit down, you come in from Shul Shabbos morning, and you make Kiddush, and you've got some kichels and you've got some herring. Do you make ala michya on that mazonis? And that's a big issue. So if you, and I've always...
If you go into the meal.
Right, so the question is, how much of a gap between the Kiddush and the meal does it need to be for you to make a lamicha? That's really the question. So he says in the second paragraph, footnote 30, V'imreitze lisoid miyad acher achilas hamazonis, das hagoner b'lyashuv, shetzorech levorach kodim lachem brocha achrona, v'lishois perek zman ad asuda, k'dei shelo likonis l'sovit brocha achrona. So he says that what you do is you make ala michya, and then you wait a period of time, it doesn't tell me how long, before you then go and wash. But if you're going straight from your Kiddush into your Suda, then you've got a shaila of a bracha, of a sofik bracha, and then not to. So I remember asking Rabbi Shmuel this question, and he said it's not clear. But the minhag is to you just go straight, pretty much you go straight into the Suda, and you don't make halamichya, or you wait, like he says, zman ma, what's his lashon? Lishos perek zman. You wait 10-15 minutes. It's hard to be magdir exactly. Okay, that's point number one. Now, next point is, so we've seen in the Mechaber that for it to constitute as a Suda for Kiddush Makom Suda purposes, it's either, ideally it should be a proper Suda, or mine mezonos, or minimally a revius of wine. What about grape juice? Now that's a big point, because we say Chamar Medina not. The reason being because Chamar Medina is not satiating like wine. So how do you deal with grape juice? On one hand, we always say that's a good replacement from wine. On the other hand, it doesn't really satiate as much. So that's what he deals with in 31. He says, "Umitzah," and this is a machoikas. "Umitzah novim ha'im dinoi kiyayin v'nechshav kasuda, oy shedinoi kasham mashkim das hagoner b'lyashav shemistabe she'ein yoytze b'shtiyosai kimin she'ein asoid." it doesn't really satiate, and therefore hasn't got the same properties as wine. He hasn't got a clear proof for this. Okay, if you went and drank revius of grape juice, you don't have to make Kiddush again. Fine. However, Reb Nissen Karelitz, שנחשב כקידש במקום סודה, וכן גץ דעס וגון רשם זמן אורבך, שנחשב כקידש במקום סודה, כיוון שמסויד סויד. So the Maisa is a machlokes in the contemporary poskim. Rabbi Yashav, Rabbi Vosna say it doesn't really, and therefore better to use proper wine for it to be kiddush makom suda. And Rabbi Karelitz and Rabbi Shem Zalman Auerbach, they say that it does work. I think the minhag is that we do rely on it. That's my experience. I think that's we do rely on it, but it's a machlokes in the poskim. Okay, now, but then the Mechaber says mine peiros not. Avol peiros lo. Peiros does not count as kiddush makom suda. So then he says in footnote 33, there's one exception. What do you think the exception is? Yeah, 33, he says tamarim. Dates are quite satisfying. So he says, in tamarim kosva primogodim, shachilosam nechshev suda mishum sheim mazinim, they satiate. Umavu le'el, shebircha lechilosam birchas hamazon yosem b'diavad yidei chayva. If for some reason you said a birchas hamazon on dates, then you yotzi chiv kiven sheim mazinim v'seadim, because they're nourishing and they satiate. Okay, so that's a useful one to know. And then 36. Just interesting. We'll come back to that in a second. But what's interesting is this to do with satiation. So he says that mine megodim, where is it? He says mine targima mechamishes minim yotza, because they're more choshev than a suda than wine. But sheikh and sham and shamashkim noi, and not that doesn't count. And then he says, where is it? The ancient, there's no pasababa kisnin, rak b'nei godim ein lo tam sham klal. Okay, so he brings here in the Radiance of Shabbos, this is Simcha Bunim Cohen's brilliant series. So he quotes here, he brings all of this, and then he says, he has a footnote, you gotta have make sure it's minimally it's got to be food from the chameshis minim, from the mezainas, and then he brings in the footnote. He quotes the Mishnah Berurah, "V'nistapaktim be'inyan in bo'inen dafka pasabo b'kisnin meheminim or desagi b'minei targima kugoin kugel." What if you have a piece of kugel, a potato kugel? So he says, "Shamaiti ma'agon Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg Shlita." At the time he was alive, desagi afilu b'minei targima. Amazing. So therefore, and I've often told this to boys in school, that they go to a Shah Kiddush, because when's the problem? The problem will be, you go to a Kiddush Shabbos, the Rav makes Kiddush, you can nash a few, crisps and have a glass of Coke, and you go home and you say, yeah, I've heard Kiddush, I'm okay. But you haven't, because I wasn't Kiddush Malkum Suda. But if you have something a bit more chunky, for example, a plate of potato kigel, or a bowl of chulent or something like that, then l'chayra that's considered okay. Certainly, Scheinberg says that would be okay. I'll tell you where it's another problem. When it's a problem Pesach, because Pesach for those people who don't brach, then you've got a problem because you never end up making mazonis on Pesach, right? So what do you do? So
just drink the wine.
So either you can drink the wine, that would be the thing. The best thing to do is to wash. 1 year, 2 years now, I gave the shirim one of the Pesach programs, and they don't have gebrachs, right? So they advertise the non-gebrachs or whatever. So they have these very lavish kedeshim, and you're making shahakal, right? It's a very strange phenomenon. So the best thing to do is to wash to make kiddush, have your 2 matzahs, that's your lechem mishnah, and then enjoy the kiddush, then you've got no shayla whatsoever. But if you don't, then I'm always somech on this from Scheinberg, and I can tell other people the same. It's such a lavish, beautiful kiddush, and you don't miss the gebra, you don't miss the mazonas at all. And true, you're not making mazonas, but there's so many delicious foods that certainly that would count. But mokum suda, if you can have a piece of potato kigel, which is mokum suda, then lachera that would as well. But certainly your eitzah of having a glass of wine is also a good eitzah. All right, just one thing that the Ramah says. That when it comes to a bris, then either the male can drink, but preferably you should give it to the tinok. So what's pshat in that? So in 36 he explains, Bia Hagonim Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. What's pshat in that? Shenagu boikein shechoshu lases shtias yain lo yimaile lechoshu makom suda. In other words, the Mishnah Berurah, the Shlomo Zalman explains this Ramah to mean that because we're choishish, maybe the drinking of the wine is not good enough. Better he gives it to a kid to drink, and then he makes kiddush properly makom suda. However, das harmoshe ikadin kashitas hagoinim b'li pipuk, i.e., we can be somich on the goinim who say that wine counts as makom suda. Okay, let's just finish the simon, 2 short halachas. Sif vov. V'im kiddush v'beisai. A guy is making kiddush in his house. V'shama shchena v'shulchana orach lefonov. So my neighbor's making kiddush. Yeah, Baruch Hashem, last night we were busy with the sukkah, and there's clapping on all sides, so we can hear exactly what's going on both sides of our house. So imagine my neighbor's about to make kiddush. I'm about to sit down for lunch on Shabbos. I'm thinking, fine, I'll listen to his kiddush, and I've got my suda straight in front of me. Does that work? So if im kiddush bebeis of v'shama shchena v'shulchan aruch lefonov, I hear my neighbor make kiddush, and my shulchan is laid, and I'm ready to eat. Yoytze boy, I can be yoytze. The shab have a mokum suda. But here's the big important caveat: so long as my neighbor's got in mind that he's being moitzi me, and I've got in mind to be yoytze, otherwise it doesn't work. It says the Mishnah Berurah, Kiddush v'uadin ta'afil lechatchila yochel lekadosh b'beisa kadei shishmei shechena hadar b'bayis acher. Even lechatchila that would work. V'mishchena einu yodeh ba'atzman lekadosh. If my neighbor doesn't know how to make kiddush, mahani ha'kiddush sheloi afilu einu yochel ba'atzmai. Then that's what we discussed yesterday. That if my neighbor doesn't know how to make kiddush, I lechatchila can make kiddush for him, even though I'm not eating anything, but I'm being made to him, and he's going straight into his suda. That would work. So too with that. Okay. Near the lav dafka. It doesn't have to be this mamish as table is set. Even if it's ready to eat now and is now going to set his table, but he's listening to kiddush. That was my intention. B'shas kiddush v'chanal b'sif gimel b'hago. This is a general important rule for all types of kiddashim, that you've got to be yotzi, you've got to have in mind to be yotzi, and the person's got to have in mind to be moitzi. It's very important the person making kiddush should have in mind to be moitzi everyone, and the person listening should have in mind to be yotzi. Okay, Sif Zayin. Let's just finish off. You should really make kiddush where there is light. V'yesh om she'ena kiddush tolu b'nen, so others say not. V'imhu nena b'chotze yosim b'pnei haver. A person likes eating in the courtyard, even though the lights are inside. Picture Friday night by the candles. You should really eat by the candles. But if you like eating in the chotze because it's brighter outside, like in the summer, in the evenings, there are flies inside. Mekadesh b'chotze v'oichel afapi she'ena roitze roya haneh. You can make kiddush in the courtyard, even though you can't see the candles. Sha'neres la'onig nitztava v'loy l'tzar. That the nearest they're for onig and not for tza'ah, for hochi mistabra, and that is mistabra. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'oichel shana v'loy kadosh b'bayis v'oichel b'chotze. Don't make kiddush in the house and then go in the chotze, or chudel b'sif aleph, because then you've got problems that we spoke about at the beginning of this simon. Hochi mistabra dahainu b'mitzvah haba. If a person is very distressed in the house, because otherwise you should try and eat where the candles are. Better to to make kiddush in the house. Have a little bit of, have your challah there. And then you can go finish off your meal in the chotze. Okay,